free agency frenzy. We're on the official start of free agency now, Alex. I don't know if the Patriots have made any moves yet, but oh wait, they made all the moves already.
I don't believe are any of them official. I don't believe any of them are because they still need to wait on the what's it called, physical.
Right. So Hunter Henry tweeted out something like "Let's go Patriots," let's get it, something like that, with a nice little what's it called?
Jersey swap with 86, by the way. So we'll see what that means for Devin Asiasi.
Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene are going to be fighting for a roster spot, I think, is what it means moving forward with those two guys on the team. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that have gone on today. Certainly, we're going to talk about some of the stuff that might go on in the future in terms of targets that are still on the board. I think the one thing I wanted to start with, though, before we get into some of the moves that the Patriots did make today, is right now what we are seeing is a very soft market for a lot of players out there. Kenny Golladay is going on a visit to the New York Giants before they even make him an offer. The top wide receiver in free agency can't get anything better than a one-year deal from the Cincinnati Bengals right now. That's where we're at with this market. The Patriots have spent a lot of money. The Jaguars have spent some of their money. But really what we are seeing, Alex, is the league-wide, there's just not a ton of cap space, and teams are sort of punting on free agency this year and kind of planning on rolling over with the cap space that they do have into 2022. The new TV deal is going to hit. And then they're going to have a nice explosion of the cap next offseason in order for teams to go back out and spend again. So a lot of guys that are still available. Galladay's one of the top guys still available, but Juju Smith-Schuster, Curtis Samuel, Will Fuller, pretty much the whole wide receiver market besides Nelson Aguilar and Corey Davis is still a free agent. I think that it's pretty crazy to think that the Patriots at this point might have spent all this money already, and they could scoop up some of these guys on one-year deals moving forward, because this is just not a very robust market because of all the factors that we've talked about coming into free agency, with the cap being where it's at.
Right, and we know they were in on AJ Green as well, so they're potentially still shopping. I think there's a number of reasons the market's down. The lower cap, certainly, like you mentioned. I think that's part of it. I think that's the chief reason. But I think there's other reasons as well. I think maybe when we hyped up this free agency class at the position, we might have ignored some red flags. Kenny Galladay's durability, Juju Smith-Schuster's focus. You had Will Fuller getting popped for PEDs, right? It was PEDs last year, so there's certainly some red flags there that might potentially stop an investment. Not being able to get a look at guys at that position, maybe there's more of an urge to want a physical, which teams it's tougher to do right now due to COVID. So that potentially might be slowing down the market. And I wonder if the Patriots, overpaying for Nelson Aguilar, and I think we all agree it was a bit of an overpayment, maybe not a bad signing, but a bit of an overpayment. Sure. I wonder if teams look at that and agents look at that contract, and there's some further divide between the sides negotiating the deals when you use Aguilar as a benchmark. So the Patriots may have actually had a hand in slowing down this market, which if it comes back to benefit them, if they do end up with one of these wide receivers, that's something we can look at as potentially a chess versus checkers argument.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Seahawks just signed Gerald Everett to a 1-year, $6 million deal. So
that's it.
That was what I was expecting in terms of per year value, right? But I thought Gerald Everett would be on a 3 or a 4 year contract.
He signed with Seattle, that's a notorious black hole franchise for tight ends. Like, you don't go there and succeed if you're a tight end. So that tells me he didn't have a lot of options in terms of places to go.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think it's insane that Kenny Golladay is at where he's at. I know Albert Breer has reported in the past that Kenny Golladay wasn't too interested in going to another Belichick disciple or even playing here in New England for Belichick himself because of his experience with Matt Patricia. And now he might have to go to the Giants because they're giving him the best contract on the table currently, or take that 1-year deal I mentioned from Cincinnati and hit free agency again next year and kind of reset his market. It's a very dicey market right now for a lot of guys, and I think that that's really a factor moving forward. If you're New England, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, just some of the targets that still remain out there, but I want to bring it back to Patriots moves today. I think the biggest move of the day, and we're going to get to J.C. Jackson in a little bit as well, but I think the biggest move is David Andrews out at center, Ted Harris in at center. Obviously, the Patriots wanted to get something done with David Andrews. They hit the deadline today, and it didn't work out. David Andrews sounds like he's probably Miami bound, but I think the Packers, potentially the Baltimore Ravens, might be in the mix for David Andrews as well. But right now for New England, as soon as they signed Ted Karras, we all said it on Twitter, this probably means that things with David Andrews are done. Karras, a solid center for them in 2019, has some issues with run blocking, getting to the second level, speed and space, stuff like that, but a very sound pass protector. I think he can hold down that position for a year. But just first, your reaction before we get into things about the future of the center position, just your reaction to David Andrews' Patriots career likely being over.
Well, there was almost sort of a trade there, right? It was Ted Karras and Devon Godchaux for what looks like it's going to be David Andrews and Adam Butler.
Right.
And, the Dolphins may have gotten the better end of that deal. I think the Patriots certainly helped themselves out contract-wise, financially there. Ted Karras, a good player, good, solid player. We talked at length yesterday on the show, for those of you who were watching last night, about how important the center is pre-snap and that communication element and what that guy brings. And that might have been, as good as he was elsewhere, that might have been David Andrews' best asset. You're going to get a guy who knows how to do that and knows how to do that in this offense in Ted Karras. So I think, losing Andrews hurts. It does. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They probably went out and got themselves the best replacement, especially after we learned that they weren't interested in Rodney Hudson. Mark Daniels had reported that from the Providence Journal. So they did okay. Look, you don't keep everybody. Andrews is a guy you would have liked to see them keep, but it's a business. That's the nature of the NFL. Sucks to see him go. Had a great career, is going to continue to have a great career. And maybe he comes back the way this offseason's gone and the way the Patriots operate. Maybe this isn't it. Maybe it's just see you later. But they're going to be all right. You mentioned the run blocking is the biggest issue for Ted Karras. And I look at who he's going to be playing between, likely in Michael Onwenu and Shaq Mason. And I think that they're probably in a spot where they can hide that deficiency a little bit from the center position. So they'll be all right. You hate to see it. It's a loss. They'll have to adjust, but it's not monumental.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said. I think the biggest thing with Ted Karras is when you watch him run block is that he's a bigger center, right? He's really a guard playing center, and he's a bigger guy, so he doesn't have the athleticism that David Andrews has to be able to climb up to the second level, to be able to go out and block in space on a screen. He doesn't move as well in that type of way. So that's where you have to kind of get into that scheming it up to kind of hide it, right? To kind of get away with that. And you also have at left guard, although Michael Onwenu has good foot speed for 350 pounds, he's not exactly a fleet of foot guy either at that size. So I think that those are two guys that they're going to have to realize, okay, we're probably going right if we're going to do something on the outside, if we're going to throw a screen, something like that. Going to the left with the center and the left guard involved might be a little bit more tricky. I think it's something that you can certainly get away with, though. And Ted Karras is a guy that's a very solid, steady, reliable player that's been in the system, that knows the playbook like the back of his hand, that also understands the expectations in New England and just kind of how to handle the pressure of the Patriots. I remember after week 1, 2019, he had some issues with shotgun snaps, right? And he came in the locker room after the game and said, nobody told me that anything was wrong with my shotgun snaps, but then I turned on my phone after the game and I had all these tweets about how bad the shotgun snaps were on my notifications. And that was when he sort of learned that that was an issue, and he went back to it and started working on it and things like that. So he sort of gets it. He gets what New England is about. He gets what the system is about. So I think that is an easy transition. And we talked about this, I think, in yesterday's show when we were talking about the potential of losing David Andrews. I said that re-signing a guy like Ted Karras for a year and drafting one of these centers in this year's draft makes a whole lot of sense if you're the Patriots. Now, the Patriots have not necessarily invested a high draft pick in a center in the past. Brian Stork, I think, was the highest at a 4th-round pick.
Yeah, well, they've also never spent $300 million in one free agency. I think we need to throw they've never done this out the window.
They also have never drafted a wide receiver in the 1st round until they took N'Keal Harry, right? So crazier things have happened. They've addressed so many positions of need in free agency that these ones that are getting heightened now, okay, maybe you can talk yourself into drafting a Landon Dickerson or a Creed Humphrey earlier on in the draft. And that's where I wanted to go next with this conversation with Ted Karras joining the Patriots on a 1-year deal. That definitely signals that the Pats are probably going to be looking for a long-term answer in the draft at that position. And it's a really darn good draft to need a center, right? Because you have two guys in Dickerson and Creed Humphrey from Oklahoma that are 10-year starters in the league as long as their health holds up. And they have no reason to believe that their health won't hold up. I know Dickerson's a guy that you probably know a ton about already, and Creed Humphrey is just your typical Oklahoma offensive lineman. They seem to produce a good offensive lineman or two every single year, and he's just another one in a long line. He was a guy, Humphrey, too, that I remember as a true freshman, people started talking about as an NFL prospect. And he was somebody that everybody was super high on back then, and he's only kind of steadily gotten better. But Dickerson's also somebody, he obviously has the Saban ties at Alabama, but overall just a player that I think checks a lot of their type of toughness, high IQ mentality type of boxes.
And there's one guy you left out there is Quinn. It's Miritz, right, from Wisconsin Whitewater. Quinn Miritz, who they were at his
another good one too. Yeah, probably going to be more of an early day 3 guy.
Division III player that's going to scare some people, but he had a real strong showing at the Pro Bowl. Showed he can hold up against elite Division I talent. They were at his pro day a couple weeks ago, and he just kind of his strengths fit their strengths. His play style fits what they want in a center. Yeah. So that could be a guy maybe they look at. Those are the 3, I think. If they want to really invest, they'll go get the kid from Alabama. If it's, maybe if he's off the board or somebody reaches, they get the kid from Oklahoma. And then they always have the Wisconsin Whitewater kid to fall back on.
Yeah, I actually think the Wisconsin Whitewater kid makes a lot of sense.
Right. But when I say to fall back on, he's hardly, you end up with him, you did well.
Yeah, so. Manera is a guy that probably needs a year to sit or at least develop. And you just sign Karras, who can be a stopgap for the season. You bring up the guy he's a D3 guy. I think putting him in at starting center year 1, week 1 is probably a lot to ask to go from D3 football to starting center of the New England Patriots, right? I don't know if you want to put all your eggs in that basket right away, but if you can develop him behind a guy like Karras, then certainly you can slow play it a little bit and eventually see, okay, does this guy have this play speed? Does he have the play strength to make it at this level of football? He certainly showed that he did at the Senior Bowl, and we know how much everybody loves watching him at the Senior Bowl with the Patriots. Everybody's eyes in New England are always on those Senior Bowl kids. And I know that they've done a lot of homework on a lot of those Senior Bowl guys after the Senior Bowl too. So this is another draft where we could see multiple Senior Bowl picks from the Patriots. Dickerson was down there. Humphrey was also there. Humphrey participated in practices, I believe. Dickerson was still injured from that injury from the national championship game or the college football playoff, right? That carried over in the national championship game, I think it was. And so he didn't participate in practice, I don't believe, but Creed Humphrey did. So if they liked anything that they saw out of those guys down there in Mobile, I'm sure that they're going to be high on the list for the Patriots now. But I think what we're both kind of getting at is, as great of a Patriot as David Andrews was, as great of a leader as he was for New England, they have a lot of options, and Ted Karras kind of buys them some time. So they have a full year of time to develop somebody, and they have a lot of options moving forward, especially in this draft. This draft, and I know I love this with the draft, is absolutely stacked along the offensive line. Whether you need a tackle, a guard, or a center, this is a great draft to need offensive line depth, so that they're in a good spot in terms of that. Also, I would also throw a tackle as well as a potential offensive line depth position, and they have plenty of guys that they could really go for there too.
It's funny. What are their 3 biggest immediate needs right now? It's probably offensive lineman, quarterback, and running back. I'm talking about immediate needs. They need some other project guys at other positions, but those are probably their 3 biggest needs, and it's a great draft at all 3 of those positions.
Yeah.
So it seems like, and we're downplaying the draft, and we collectively, Patriots fans, I think, are downplaying the draft based on what we've seen in free agency, and I don't think that's incorrect. And I talked about this yesterday. They only have so many roster spots left. They're probably going to have to condense picks, consolidate picks, end up moving up just so they don't take as many guys, so they can roster all the guys they want to roster out of the draft. So I do think that there is a plan here for the draft, and the draft is going to be relevant. Maybe not as relevant as we thought, but this plan continues into April. I think there's a clear path for them to keep making an impact in the draft on the 2021 roster.
Agreed. And this is just such a totally great offensive line draft. I mean, I could gush about some of these tackles for days. I won't, don't worry, but I could, because you
got to put that behind like a Patreon.
This
where
is
it's just like you going on and on about tackles.
Yeah, it's like 15, 16 tackles deep, I would say, in terms of guys that are going to probably go in the first 4 or 5 rounds. I mean, it is incredible. You have guys at the end of this too that are guys that haven't necessarily played in a while because of the pandemic, like Walker Little, for example, from Stanford, who I don't think has played since like 2019, but he's a really good prospect. Sam Cosmi's a really good prospect from Texas. One of my favorite prospects in the entire draft at the tackle position is Dylan Radunes from North Dakota State, who protected Trey Lance's blind side. I just kept on watching North Dakota State tape a ton, and because of Trey Lance, and I'm like, he's never touched on the left side. Like, who's this tackle? And it turns out he's one of the best tackles in the draft. He is a really good player too, really athletic. Reminds me a lot of Nate Solder. So I think that there's a lot to go there in the draft. Let's turn our pages, though, here to J.C. Jackson. The Patriots did tender him at the second round level. This was a little bit interesting because they could have tendered him at the first round level and just said, no one's going to get this player. And obviously one of the better corners in the league, a young guy, still very, very much an ascending player, as good as he has played in his first couple of seasons with the Patriots. But they tender him at that second level. I think there's a lot of ways that you could possibly go from here. My take on it is I think the Patriots are actually hoping that somebody signs him to an offer sheet because they're thinking that it's going to be below market value given what they've seen around the market so far in free agency.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I would say if that was the goal, if the goal was to retain J.C. Jackson on an under-market deal, then wouldn't you want to tender him for a first-round pick? I mean, I guess maybe that scares teams off together. I'm not saying one's right, one's wrong, but the higher the pick, the less the team's going to realistically offer, right, on the other end?
Well, right. So what I'm thinking is that the first round tender, I don't even think teams would have touched that, right?
Okay, so you just think at that point teams wouldn't even risk losing the pick.
Right,
and I think that's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair.
The question is that are you going to give up in such a market that's so cold as it is now? Are you going to give up a second round pick and most of your cap space to sign J.C. Jackson this offseason? Or are you going to just hope he hits the tender, makes it to free agency next year, and then sign him as an unrestricted free agent, right? You know, those are the two kind of options for teams. And I think for the Patriots, what they're hoping for is that J.C. Jackson jumps at the money that maybe a team offers him on an offer sheet. And let's say he signs an offer sheet that's only at like $10 or $11 million per season. The Patriots, I think, would gladly match that. But they want J.C. Jackson to go out there and see what his market is, even on the RFA tag, and then see if they can get something below market value from there. Because if J.C. Jackson comes back next year on the RFA tender and has a great season, we're talking about upwards of close to $15 million once the cap goes back up.
Right. Yeah. So I do think it's kind of a play by the Patriots. And I've talked about this before. They have a way to kind of string him along at cost. They have this year, they can use different tags on him next year. And I think they're just trying to use that leverage to get a team friendly deal done. Like you mentioned, this may be a way to do it with another team making the offer. I don't know that they're totally out on a second round pick either. I wonder if, they got a high second round pick, and I don't know that one of those teams picking at the top of the second round is going to pay a lot of money for a corner right now and give up that pick, because those are mostly teams that sucked last year. Like maybe that's the plan. And then maybe that gives you an extra second round pick you can use to move up and get your quarterback, to go out and get Deshaun Watson if that option presents itself. And then you either extend Stephon Gilmore or you just figure it out with cornerback on the fly. If there's one position on the entire roster that Bill Belichick can make something out of nothing, it's cornerback. Some of his best cornerbacks, J.C. Jackson, Malcolm Butler, Jonathan Jones, guys who have gone elsewhere, they're all UDFAs. Bill Belichick strikes out on corners in the second round like you wouldn't believe, but then he finds these UDFAs who turn into pros. So if there's, maybe they're fine. If J.C. Jackson leaves, hey, we get an extra second round pick. We have this extra draft capital in a trade. And, so-and-so from middle of nowhere State Tech University is actually going to be a stud, and we know it. Nobody else knows it. We'll sign him as a UDFA, and he'll be the replacement. We're good. So there's a lot of different ways they can go with this, and that's what's cool. In a lot of off seasons in past years, due to the way the roster was built, due to the salary cap, they didn't have a lot of options about how to do things. They have a lot of options with a number of things this year, and J.C. Jackson is another example where there's more than one right answer. It depends how they play it. It depends how the situation develops. but there's not one thing where you say, this is what they need to do. This is the way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with JC Jackson, I've kind of been in the minority on him, and I think he's a good player, but I don't know if I've seen elite out of him. I don't know if I've even seen great. I think he's a good corner, but I think that he is even.
Do you think he's a number one corner? Not, and I've used this analogy before, right? In baseball, you have number one starters and you have aces. Right. I don't think either of us think he's an ace. I believe he could be a number one. Do you think he's a number one?
I think he's got the potential to be an ace, but I think right now he's a nice number one, right? He's a fine number one, but is he in the category of Stephon Gilmore or Xavier Howard or any of the guys at the top, Marshawn Lattimore? I can keep on going. Those guys, I think, are a lot in a different echelon than J.C. Jackson. And I think we saw that last year when Stephon Gilmore was out of the lineup and they had to put him in that number one cornerback spot. It's one thing to say, okay, J.C. Jackson got burned by Stephon Diggs. Everybody got burned by Stephon Diggs last year. But the game against the Jets where he got burned by Brashad Perryman a couple of times certainly gives me a little bit of pause, right? Because
Brashad Perryman's a good player. He's not Stephon Diggs, but don't knock my boy Brashad Perryman.
I know, and I'm actually going to talk about Brashad Perryman in a little bit, but
love it.
Mainly, my point is that Brashad Perryman is not Randy Moss, right? He's a fine NFL wideout, but he's not an absolute stud like that. So to see J.C. Jackson struggle and also to struggle defending the deep ball in particular against Brashad Perryman, which is kind of his bread and butter, that's certainly gives you a little bit pause. The other thing that gives me a little bit of pause about him is that his mindset sort of changed at some point. I remember talking to him early on in his career, his rookie season, and he told me he's a press man corner, right? He wants to get into guys' faces, be physical at the line of scrimmage, play press man, bump and run type of coverage. Now he's kind of calling himself a ball hawk, and I don't know if the Patriots want him to be a ball hawk. I think they want him to go for interceptions sometimes, but I don't know if that's what they want him to really be overall as a player. And I think that he's starting to get into a little bit of like Asante Samuel territory where you're just kind of jumping in for interceptions, right? You're kind of hunting the INTs.
And this is a guy, he was a pending free agent. You don't get paid knocking passes down. You get paid picking them off. So maybe that was the mindset. And if you get him paid, then he kind of goes back to that. So
yeah. And he said, I think the long touchdown against Stephon Diggs in week 16 was a great example. He mentioned that he hesitated a little bit coming over the middle of the field, and he didn't really see the ball come out of the quarterback's hands and all this kind of stuff. But when I watched the play back, it kind of felt like he was trying to undercut it and try to go for the interception instead of just play. He was behind in the play, and he tried to undercut it and take the short route, right? When he really just needed to play through the hands and just tackle Stephon Diggs before he ran out after the catch into the end zone. I like him as a player. I just think that I would be careful with what I would give him in a contract if I was another team and if I was the Patriots. I'm not giving him true number one cornerback money. I'm probably more in that Malcolm Butler type of contract, Logan Ryan type of contract, $11 million, somewhere around there. But I think that the really interesting part about it is, and I see a lot of people in the chat mentioning the first round corners, J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain, Caleb Farley. We've talked about those guys a lot. J.C. Horn and Patrick Surtain in particular really scream Patriots to me. Horn is just a really physical press man, long, athletic, reminds me a whole lot of a young Stephon Gilmore, and I think they're going to see a lot of that in him. And Surtain is just kind of that technician, right? He's the guy that really gets the technique and understands what to do and all that kind of stuff. But I think the real fascinating part about this cornerback position is that we know Bill Belichick really values corners, and if he loses J.C. Jackson or if he trades Stephon Gilmore, then they're going to be in a position where they're probably going to draft a cornerback early. And I know that's going to bother a lot of Patriots fans, but that's just how Bill Belichick values that spot. They continue to just take defensive back after defensive back after defensive back every single year in the draft, early on, second round corners, second round safeties. So I don't see that trend ending anytime soon if they're seeing the writing on the wall with Gilmore or J.C. Jackson.
Yeah, it's gonna come down to really how that Gilmore situation plays out. I think they have until April 23rd is the deadline where J.C. Jackson has to sign that tender and play. So I think that kind of puts a deadline, and that, by the way, would be right before the draft. So there's a chance if Gilmore's on that timeline, if that's the whole cornerback timeline, that we get a resolution on what's happening with Stephon Gilmore in that window as well. Just to go back to the rookie corners, I think it's tough. Like the guys you mentioned, love Patrick Surtain as a player, love him as a fit. I think he's the first defensive player off the board. I think he's the most NFL-ready defender in this draft. I think he has incredible upside. I don't see him getting outside of the top 5. I think Fairley could go relatively soon after him. J.C. Horn's a stretch at 15, maybe a stretch. But I think if they want any of those guys, they have to trade up. I think if it's corner in the first round, you're looking at, Asante Samuel Jr. is probably the 4th corner in the draft after those big 3. You're looking at a guy like that.
Yeah, I agree that J.C. Horn may be a little bit of a stretch, maybe a trade back candidate. If the Patriots want to take the draft, how they always take the draft and trade back and accumulate picks and do that sort of thing, then maybe they could get into that J.C. Horn territory somewhere around, 25, 26 instead of 15. But he's a really good player too. I liked his tape a lot. If you go watch him play against Auburn, I think he had like 3 or 4 picks in that game. It was just an incredible cornerback tape. So you can definitely see the talent there. What about Adam Butler? Any love lost there? I think it's an interesting situation. He didn't really necessarily get paid by Miami. It's a 2-year, $9.5 million contract. Some more breaking news. Curtis Samuel signing with the Washington football team. So Curtis
Evan
is off the board. That one was kind of writing on the wall. The Patriots weren't interested when they signed Nelson Aguilar. Not the same ball carrier skills with Nelson Aguilar, but a Z receiver that's going to play a similar kind of route tree as Curtis Samuel. Well, let's get back to Butler now that the Samuel off the board, not coming to New England. I do think that he needs to be replaced in some fashion, but I do find it very interesting that the Patriots went into this free agency period prioritizing Dietrich Wise as their own free agents on the defensive line and wanting to go out of house for the rest of the defensive linemen. They were not too sold on Adam Butler and Lawrence Guy as guys that they really needed to bring back. They gave Dietrich Wise a really nice contract to come back to New England and promised him that he was going to play more, and actually said to Dietrich Wise that we're going to surround you with new guys. It's not going to be the same old face of characters here next year. There are going to be new guys involved, and that's basically how it's played out. So Adam Butler to Miami on a 2-year deal, joins Brian Flores. Again, needs to be replaced, but I don't think that that's a role that they need to draft early in the draft.
Yeah, and good point in the chat, by the way. Curtis Samuel and Terry McLaurin together.
Good combo.
With Ryan Fitzpatrick. That's going to be a ton of fun. Yeah, Butler, for me, he got shorter money than I was expecting. I think he's a really unique player. And it's sometimes people say that when players aren't good, but they want to be nice. Adam Butler is a really good football player. He also happens to have a very unique skill set in that he's a primary pass rush, true defensive tackle. He's not one of these defensive ends that you move on to the inside to rush the passer. Like, he is a pass rushing borderline nose tackle. You don't see a lot of those. There's almost none of them in the NFL right now. So that's why I thought the Patriots would hold on to him. I think he's actually harder to replace than you mentioned in some sense. You can go and get another guy who's as good of a pass rusher as him, but that guy's also probably a pretty good run stopper, and that's going to be expensive. To get a guy who just has that pass rush ability and you can get for that cost, being a situational player, is tough to find. The reason I think they passed on him is because of what I just said. He's a pass rush specialist, and what all of these moves have been, there seems to be a very heavy focus on upgrading the run defense. And Dietrich Wise, who put on weight last year to become a better run defender and was a better run defender, right? And he played more snaps last year than he had in his entire career. He turned into a true 3-down player. Henry Anderson is a guy who's going to stop the run. Matt Judon, when you talk about edge rushers, is as good of a run stopper as any edge rusher that was available. So even in their pass rusher, they prioritize stopping the run. Devon Godchaux, who I think you might look at as the roster spot replacement for Adam Butler, much better run stopper. Danny Shelton, people mentioned in the chat, like if he comes back, he fits into this. Adam Butler's weakness was against the run.
Yeah.
So if they're trying to make sure that they upgrade that, right, 32nd ranked run defense, right, that's the number in DVOA last year. They allowed 2,000 yards on the ground, most since 2013. If they're trying to rectify that situation and that's number one on the to-do list, Adam Butler is not a part of that solution. And I think that's why he's no longer here.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said. He was a one-tech nose tackle that basically was best. And this is why I was a little bit surprised that he went to Miami, was because I think he would definitely be best going up the field, vertically up the field, penetrating in the backfield, both against the run and the pass. But he didn't do that. He went to Miami, where they're going to use him basically the same way that the Patriots used him, on stunt schemes, different types of things, using him in the pass rush, disguising different types of fronts, multiple fronts, but mostly on stunts, right? Where he's going to be the guy that's going to get that penetration, occupy blockers, allow his teammates to come around and make plays on the quarterback. That's a really kind of niche role. Right. And the Patriots, I think, sort of felt like we can probably get a player that can penetrate and can occupy blockers later on in the draft. Maybe it's even Devin Godshot. There's other options that we can go with there and be a little bit stouter against the run, because every single time they tried to put Adam Butler in a gap and have him two gap or have him hold up at the point of attack, he got pushed around. When he fired off the ball and got in the backfield, he was able to make plays. And that was, I think, a big thing that the Patriots sort of noticed with those guys, is that some of these guys were not scheme versatile. Some of these guys were not run down and pass down players. They're kind of just one or the other. And I think they wanted to get a little bit more versatile. They certainly wanted to get a little bit more stout against the run. I agree 100% there. But I mainly think with Butler that if I was him, I would have gone to like a penetrating 4-3 scheme and tried to see if I get off the ball, if I get up the field, play after play after play, I'm going to start racking up plays behind the line of scrimmage. There was specifically a play against the Arizona Cardinals last year where he flew off the ball against an outside zone scheme and backdoored it and was able to run down the running back for a tackle for loss. If I was Adam Butler, that's what I would want to continue to do every single week. Instead, he's going to another 2-gapping 3-4 system with Brian Flores. So it's going to be interesting to see if his role is any different down there in Miami than it has been up here, because up here it was a good fit in passing situations, a bad fit in running situations. And that was certainly something that teams were able to take advantage of. So Curtis Samuel, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you don't know, like, there might have been better landing spots for him as a player, but was the money there?
True.
Right? Teams aren't spending money, and maybe he was looking to get into a situation where he could play that role and he couldn't. And if that's the case, he's better off with a guy like Brian Flores, who at least knows what he can do and is going to do as much as he can to put him in a spot to succeed. And somebody mentioned in the chat, I mentioned the uniqueness of Adam Butler, and somebody brought up Byron Cowart. I actually do think Byron Cowart could potentially slide into that prototype a little bit, and he's still under contract for a couple more years. So that was a good point from the chat, bringing up that name.
Yeah. So
who said Carl Davis got $337? Carl Davis got like $800,000.
Yeah. So I think Corey Davis, and that's what I
wanted. Corey Davis.
That's where I wanted to go. Let me see if I can pull up this comment that I just saw that has both contract details. Okay. So this is sort of the question, right? Curtis Samuel got 3 for 34.5 from the Washington football team. The Patriots paid Nelson Aguilar 2 at 26. Now, Nelson Aguilar's contract structure, his 2021 cap hit's only going to be $7 million. So it's not exactly, with NFL contracts, you can't just take 26 and divide it by 2. Right? It doesn't really work that way. So this year, Nelson Aguilar's cap hits $7 million. Next year, it will be $15 million unless they rework that deal, which I think they probably will. Mainly the question is, though, do you like the decision? Because it's roughly the same money, right? If we're going to really get into it, it's roughly the same money, just an extra year for Curtis Samuel. Do you like the decision of going Aguilar over Samuel?
Personally, I don't. If I have to guess why they did it, I think there could be a couple reasons. Maybe size. Aguilar's a much bigger receiver.
Yeah.
That brings a much bigger body than Samuel does. And if they're going to trade N'Keal Harry, which it's certainly starting to sound like they will, they'd be really small at wide receiver without Nelson Aguilar. There would be a big issue when it comes to size. So maybe that's the reason Aguilar's here. Maybe, we talk about Curtis Samuel. Aguilar's a traditional outside receiver, right? You're going to line him up outside the numbers, and that's where he's going to operate from, and that's what it's going to be. Curtis Samuel, you move around more, and he can go from the slot, he can go from the backfield, and that sounds attractive. But I wonder if, they bring in Jonnu Smith, and he's going to do that, and, can him and Curtis Samuel both do that at the same time? You'd like to think ideally, yes, that would be a ton of fun. If you're bringing in a rookie quarterback, that's asking a ton. So maybe they figure we got our wild card offensive player in Jonnu Smith. we don't really need to invest a ton of money in Curtis Samuel because some of the stuff that he would do, Johnny's going to do. So if I had to justify it, not saying I agree with those reasonings, if I had to justify it, that's where my mind goes. But, you know, in a vacuum, I probably like the Samuel deal better. I also, did they have the breakdown year to year on Samuel?
Not yet. So, we're still waiting on the actual details of the contract, but that's what's being reported.
Right.
And we know that they always inflate those numbers when they first report them.
Naturally. But so the other thing I'm wondering was the Patriots have front loaded all of these deals and they're trying to take advantage of the cap space now and then the cap ballooning with the new TV deal coming up. I wonder if Samuel wouldn't take that structure. I wonder if Samuel wouldn't take the backloaded deal, and maybe it was just a matter of, you know, the cap hit for Aguilar is going to be lower in 2021. And in that sense, because it's only, what is it? It's like $7 million.
$7 million.
2021.
It's $15 million in 2022, the way they structured it. But again, like I mentioned when we were talking about this right away, I think that they're going to do something to Nelson Aguilar's contract next year. I don't think that he's going to be on the team at a $15 million cap hit. Whether they really like him because he has a great season in 2021 and then they extend him moving forward, or they're able to kind of get something a little bit more done there in terms of a pay cut or a restructure or some sort of bonus conversion or something like that. There's plenty of ways that you can manipulate the cap. So
I guess
that's going to be the number.
What I was going to say is if Samuel wanted, you know, that a more even split, that's a difference in $3, $4, $5 million that the Patriots have this year. And that's Ted Karras. So maybe it's something as simple as Samuel. They couldn't agree to the structure of the contract. And at that point, the Patriots just moved on to the next guy.
Yeah, so the way I look at it with Curtis Samuel is exactly what you mentioned with Johnny Smith, right? They have their guy that they're going to scheme touches for already. And with Curtis, I think he's a really good player and he's a great ball carrier. He's an electric ball carrier at times, but he is not the type of guy, and he's a better route runner than maybe he gets credit for by some people, but this is not an elite route runner, right? This is not an elite downfield receiver in that respect. He can certainly get open down the field because of his speed, but he's not necessarily that type of guy. So I think that element of it, the scheme touches, the behind the line of scrimmage touches, the yak, get him in space, put the ball in his hand types of plays, I think that they were looking for that to be more of Johnny Smith's role. And with Hunter Henry taking some of the more traditional tight end route trees, I don't think that I think they saw too much overlap there with those three players, right? Hunter Henry is going to be up the seam. He's going to be the option routes over the middle. He's going to be your between the numbers and dominate between the numbers type of threat. And Johnny's going to be sort of your joker, move him around the formation, get the ball in his hands in space. Where does Curtis Samuel fit into that sort of structure? Maybe not as well as a guy like Nelson Aguilar, who still does have inside-outside versatility. You know, he played inside with the Philadelphia Eagles. He played more on the outside with the Raiders. The Raiders used a lot of condensed splits. They put him on the backside of the formation a whole lot as an X-receiver, condensed in tight to the formation. So he had a lot of space still to operate with. And I think that's what the Patriots are going to be. I think they're going to be a very compact offense because they're going to have a lot of guys in the middle of the field that are going to be serious threats. And that's where they're going to want to funnel the football to. So I think that they're going to be, I don't think this is going to be a 5-wide spread them out type of offense, right? I think this is going to be an offense that plays between the hash marks and is going to really try to focus on that area of the field. So I think Nelson Aguilar fits that a whole lot better in his ability to be able to go outside, to go inside, and be able to do both of those types of things. I also like the fact that Nelson Aguilar is a little bit of a better deep threat, I think, at this point than Curtis Samuel, somebody that knows how to win down the field a little bit more. But ultimately, I loved Curtis Samuel as a player. I just think that you hit the nail on the head. If they hadn't signed Johnny Smith and they went just Hunter Henry, then Curtis Samuel would have made perfect sense as the Z off the line gadget type of player. But now that they have Jonnu, they have to scheme those types of touches for him. And you get too many of those types of guys that need to be schemed open, and you start to run into some issues there.
And I think to piggyback off something you said about the overlap, and somebody in the chat mentioned you can't have too many weapons, and that is true. But what are you paying all these guys, and where do the roster spots come from? And we expect the Patriots are going to be in at least 12 personnel a significant amount of the time. Is 50% too high for me to guess 12 personnel next year?
Not, I don't think so, because somebody mentioned this too, and this is kind of a good transition into this conversation. Is the Patriots right now don't necessarily have a true X wide receiver on
Yeah.
their roster, right? Nelson Aguilar is a Z naturally. Jacoby Myers is kind of a slot naturally, but
Big
also
slot,
maybe a Z. And then you have a guy, really the only guy that's rostered that can play that X spot out of the wide receivers is N'Keal Harry, and I don't think we want him being the number one option there.
And
so
we think he's getting traded. So what I was going to say to lead into this is, if you're going to be out of 12 personnel, I think you might see, depending on kind of how it goes with the running backs here, potentially some more 22 personnel. How many snaps are there for wide receivers? And if you pay Nelson Aguilar significant money, you pay Curtis Samuel significant money, they still might take a guy in the draft. They're still in on somebody. Like, where are the snaps? How are you getting all these guys on the field where you're getting the proper return on your investment? So we talked about this a bit yesterday with the Hunter Henry signing. People saying, well, they still don't have a number one wide receiver. Hunter Henry's your number one wide receiver.
Right.
Hunter Henry is going to probably be, unless Julian Edelman comes back and he's 100% healthy and he's old school Julian Edelman, Hunter Henry is probably going to be your leading wide receiver, and that's not a bad thing. He had, what was it last year, like 70 catches for 800 yards? You up those numbers a little bit because he only played 14 games, and you're talking about a potential 1,000-yard wide receiver. So he is, I guess, for lack of a better term, and the technical people will get mad at me for this, Hunter Henry is, in a way, your X wide receiver in this offense. So I'm not, particularly worried about it. I think that you're going back to the days of the Patriots where the number one wide receiver is the tight end. And by the way, the number 2 wide receiver is probably your tight end as well. And if James White comes back, your number 3 wide receiver is probably your running back. So buckle up.
So where I was going with this 100% is that I think Hunter Henry is your X. Right. I think that Hunter Henry is going to take a lot of snaps one-on-one on the backside of the formation where the X receiver is at and be able to go one-on-one against those guys. And we saw it with the Chargers. He did it plenty with LA, right? There was instances where it was mostly in the red zone when he did that, but he did plenty of times. And I keep mentioning the word condensed splits, and I think that that's such a key terminology moving forward for this Patriots offense, just the way that they are built. And when you run from condensed splits and you have an in-tight formation, the X receiver is really playing out of the slot, right? He's really playing almost at a tight end alignment at times. So that's really not a big concern for me either. If they're going to put Hunter Henry to the left as the guy furthest outside, he's probably going to be in tighter to the formation anyways and be in a more natural tight end spot to begin with. So I think he's your traditional X for now. I think there are some options in the draft where they could go that way if they wanted to get a true X wide receiver on the depth chart. Maybe they draft a guy like De'Ami Brown from North Carolina or Nico Collins from Michigan and get somebody that can play that spot if they really want to go 3 wide receiver and they have to put somebody else on the field to be a true X. Maybe that's the way that they go with it, because I think Aguilar will probably be the F. He'll be on the with the slot receiver, he'll probably be Jacoby Myers. They'll be on one side. You put Nico Collins at the X receiver. You have the tight ends. If that's way you want to go out of 11, then you can probably do that. But I think that ultimately the best way to go out of 11 is to actually have your 11 actually be 12, right? And just kind of make it work with Hunter Henry as your X receiver. That's definitely where I would go. But I also wanted to talk about some of the moves that they can make moving forward. And this is actually a pretty good segue into that, because I actually circled some names in the free agent market still that are true X receivers, guys that maybe they could buy to fill that role. And the guy that I kind of come back to all the time is your guy and our guy now, Brashad Perryman, right? Somebody like that can be that type of receiver. Maybe they end up paying somebody in free agency to come in here and be that guy, especially if they're planning on moving N'Keal Harry.
Yeah, I wonder if they go, you have the speed with Aguilar. I wonder if they look at a true bigger body, more physical receiver, because there's issues in the past with Perryman's durability. And if you ask him to be that big physical guy, it could be an issue. At the same time, you have Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. They're kind of set with physicality. So I wouldn't be shocked if they go to another receiver. I'm just, and the AJ Green signing kind of supports that, right? Where he could be that traditional X, but also play a limited role. You're not signing AJ Green to play 80, 85, 90% of your snaps. You're probably looking at more like 60 to 65%. So maybe a guy like that is the answer. Maybe Larry Fitzgerald is the answer there. You kind of see, you transition his game into a little more of a contested catch game now that he's not as fast. But I think for the most part, they're done at wide receiver. I think I think safety's potentially still on the table. I think running back's potentially still on the table. Those are the two moves I'm looking at. I think if they keep adding a wide receiver, it's going to be one of those, mid-April to after the draft moves.
Yeah, I can understand that. I definitely would like to see them go after somebody that can play more on the outside full time to play that X spot. Just in
Des Bryant?
Maybe. I mean, if they think he's got anything left, I don't know if he does.
Well, that's the thing. I think they can get, AJ Green is obviously off the board, but I think they can get creative and go after a guy like that because, like we mentioned, that X receiver isn't going to play a ton. You're going to be in 12 personnel a lot. And, one of those older guys, if he's only on the field 20, 25 snaps a game, is going to be able to give you a lot more, is going to be able to stay fresher. So maybe that's the answer. Maybe you do go for the experience because they still have a relatively young receiver room outside of Julian Edelman, and maybe you solve a couple answers like that, whether it's Des Bryant or a guy like Des Bryant. Maybe not him specifically.
We're due for Bill Belichick to take one of those types of swings, right?
Yes.
Like the veteran that's
Ocho Cinco.
Ocho Cinco, exactly. Joey Galloway, right? That's where we're due for.
Well, AJ Green would have been the perfect guy for that role. Right. Unfortunately, he's off the board, but that I think would have been it. Not Julio Jones. You're spending too much at that point. Like Julio Jones 5 years from now.
Right. And I saw guys like Odell Beckham for a second. Odell Beckham is a traditional Z receiver, right? He could play anywhere on the field. I'm not saying that Odell has to play inside or anything like that, but he's a guy that you definitely want to play at the Z and not at the X. So I think that really, if you're going to look at that spot, maybe it's in the draft, maybe it's not at all, and they just kind of roll with Hunter Henry in that spot. I like Rashad Perriman there. The other position you mentioned, running backs.
Well, wait, hang on. I got a couple more names for you here.
Okay.
I just pulled up the list. This isn't really an X, but I got to mention my guy, Cordero Patterson. Well, I guess we already talked about they're done with the gadget players on offense. The other one I'd say, if they want like a true outside receiver and they want to add some more speed, this would kind of be going beyond Rashad Perriman is Deshaun Jackson. There might have been a report out there that they weren't interested. I don't remember. I might be imagining that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there.
Okay, so I guess Deshaun Jackson's out of the conversation, but
yeah,
fun player.
Unfortunately, a lot of these guys that are left in free agency that might fit the mold of that, taking a chance on somebody later on in their careers, is like a T.Y. Hilton, for example, who's definitely now an inside guy. Right, that's an inside receiver. The one name that I'm still going to continue to clamor for, I missed it today what they tendered him at. So if it was a high tender, maybe this isn't going to happen.
Tim Patrick, second round.
Okay, so I'd still kick the tires on a Tim Patrick contract. So I definitely would.
Let me ask you this, because you can trade RFAs. Would you trade J.C. Jackson for Tim Patrick instead of giving up the second?
I don't know if you need to do that at this point, right? Like, I think they've addressed enough weapons at this that you don't need to be that desperate with it. I just wonder what their plans are in the draft in terms of quarterback, because if they're going to need 47 to move up for a quarterback, then obviously you take this off the board. But
that's why I'm saying,
right?
Do you swap JC for you can cancel that out?
Sure. I mean, it's a possibility for sure. If you're talking about true X wideouts, though, Tim Patrick fits the bill.
That's the guy.
He checks every single box there. Another name that I think I would maybe consider at that spot, if they can get him on like a cheap 1 year prove it deal, is Will Fuller. I wouldn't pay him anything, right?
I don't think he's coming cheap. I don't think it would be cool, but I don't think that's a possibility.
Those are the only two guys that I can think of right now that I would really go all out for in the free agent market if I had to, is Tim Patrick and Will Fuller. Will Fuller, I think, is somebody that they would have to get at a bargain, right? You can't overpay anything for that guy. But if they can get him here and they put him out there with Nelson Aguilar, all of a sudden the Patriots went from a team that had no speed to a team that's got a lot of speed on the field, right? Especially with Jonnu Smith in there too. It's just a whole lot of speed if you can put those guys out there. And maybe with a Will Fuller, he's not the main guy in the offense necessarily. He's on a prove-it deal, so he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Maybe he does kind of have that ability to sort of, not get hurt, not get,
although again,
that type of stuff.
You have to sell him on a prove it deal when he's probably only playing 60-65% of the time.
Sure.
So that's going to be a really tough sell.
I just don't know if the money is out there for Will Fuller. If the money's not out there for Kenny Golladay, then I just don't think it's going to be.
But I guess what I'm saying is, if he's going to take a cheap prove it deal, won't he go somewhere where he can play 85 to 90% of the time instead of 65% of the time? If he needs to prove it, the whole point of a prove it deal is proving it. You can't prove it if you're not on the field.
The only argument would be that if they kind of think last year was, like NBA teams, when you have like a good player on a bad team and they average 25 points a game, maybe they think that was Jacoby Myers a little bit last year, where he was just the only guy that could play. So they had to throw him the football and he accumulated.
I could see that.
That's that way. And maybe they feel like their top two of Nelson Aguilar and Will Fuller is an upgrade, and they put Nelson Aguilar at the Z, they
in
put
the slot,
at the X, and they move forward like that. That's the move.
You've convinced me. You've convinced me. I don't hate that. That could work.
I would say one for 9, right? Take a 1 year, $9 million.
Does he take that?
What else is he going to do? He's not going to get the money anywhere else. Even Kenny Golladay can't even get the money. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what else he's going to do. Besides that, he has the PAD suspension. He's only suspended for one more game because he served most of it last year. But that's obviously a little bit of a red flag. The injuries are a significant red flag. I don't know if a team is going to really fork over the Brinks truck for a guy that's always hurt, right? How much is he really going to get on this type of market right now when nobody can get paid at that position? I don't know. It just feels like that if there is a move there, another kind of name brand splash, then maybe it could be somebody like that. The last thing I wanted to mention before we wrap this up is that the Patriots have continued to be active in the defensive line market. I think they are still kicking the tires on some of those guys. Sheldon Rakins was somebody that they were in the market for a little while. It looks like he's going to go elsewhere. I still like Daquan Jones from Tennessee as somebody that's a scheme fit. He reminds me a lot of kind of like a Lawrence Guy type of signing. We mentioned that with like Henry Anderson too. Those kind of guys fit their scheme very, very well. And obviously in Tennessee, they do a lot of the same things. I think that's a spot that they're still looking to add some bodies. I don't know if it's going to be a top of the market type of guy, but maybe they can't. Maybe the one guy that maybe they get into that fits that some people think he's done over the hill is Jarrell Casey, right? He's still a free agent as well. There's some bodies at that defensive line that are still free agents. I think they're going to sign at least somebody there at that spot.
And I'm still waiting on the running back thing. That's if we're just kind of doing what we think is next. James White's still out there. Duke Johnson's still out there. Phillip Lindsay's still out there. Denver actually just paid a running back today. I don't have the name off the top of my head, but I know I saw right before we came on that they signed somebody or were close to signing somebody. So that, like, what's going on there? Is James White coming back? I don't think Rex Burkhead's going to be in the conversation until he's rehabbed, but is James White coming back, or are they getting somebody else in for that role? I still think that storyline is being slept on. That angle is being slept on, how they're going to fill that spot. Should we mention, because I feel bad, this guy's been in the chat for 3 straight days.
Okay.
Mentioning Tim Boyle.
Oh my God.
Who I had to Google. But I mean, he's been watching these shows start to finish, trying to get us to talk about Tim Boyle. If we talk about him, you have to promise you keep watching and you don't leave now that we talked about him. But I feel like we should do 30 seconds on Tim Boyle because this guy's been a very loyal viewer.
I think my 30 seconds on Tim Boyle is that they can aim higher than Tim Boyle. That's
my 30 seconds on Tim Boyle is going to be taken up by my computer loading his Wikipedia page. But he was a quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, attended the University of Connecticut. He is 6'4", 200. No, I mean, I get it. He pushed Jordan Love last year. That's the argument. No, they can do better. They I keep comparing people to Stidham. At that point, you're just going back to Stidham. At that point, stick to Stidham. You're shooting for the stars. You're shot in the dark at that point. You stick with Stidham at that point.
Yeah, I appreciate the viewership as well.
No, I appreciate the dedication. It's great. Just I think that we should be looking a little high. We had Deshaun yesterday. Was all the comments was Watson. But I get like 8 messages here on the scroll. That's why I was looking off. I'm looking to see what you guys are saying. And even with Deshaun Watson hype at its peak, 1 in every 8 messages was at Tim Boyle. It was incredible.
Okay. Well, that's great. You mentioned the running backs.
Let's do the running backs.
I'm crazy. I hate it, right? I don't want it. That I want to talk nothing about running backs. But the Patriots are going to add a running back at some
I don't understand how you're so out on one of the most important roles in the Patriots offense. I don't understand how you can be so disengaged with that.
I just don't want to pay anybody because I believe in Damian Harris, and I also believe.
I'm not talking about that.
I believe in
two positions.
Number one, I believe in Sony Michel as a number one B or a two. So what we're talking about the third, paying a guy $3 or $4 million to be the third running back on the team. I mean, what are we doing?
Okay, so we move on from that. I've agreed with you. I don't know why they're trying to get another early down back. It might be to trade Sony Michel and it's a swap and maybe pick up an asset. I'm talking about when I say running backs, third down back, the pass catching back. That's where my interest is more than the potential Carson and Fournette signings. What are they doing? Are they bringing back James White? Are they replacing James White? That role's so big. It has the potential to be even bigger this year. You mentioned the condensed offense. You can do a lot with the running back out of condensed offense. You look at this, and obviously they're not going to get Christian McCaffrey, but they run, that offense when it's condensed. Cam's last couple years there, they were able to really just get him a lot of opportunities and get him rolling. And then he used his natural ability to go beyond that. This offense is kind of set up where a pass catching back can really make an impact. And we still don't know who that guy's going to be on this team.
Okay, so the one guy that I can get behind, and it might cost them too much, and this might actually surprise you. If they can get in on Phillip Lindsay, then I would entertain that as an option because I actually think that he fits perfectly as not a bell cow running back, right? He's your change of pace. He's a guy that you can put on the field on third downs. He's somebody that I feel like can fill in that James White, Rex Burkhead type of role, and Damian Harris and Sony Michel are going to tote the rock probably 250 times combined, and you let Phillip Lindsay play the other snaps and get involved in the passing down situations and just sort of be that scat back, that elusive guy, that explosive guy. I still feel like they're missing that. And if they want to add a running back, I would much rather them see add a guy like Phillip Lindsay and go after Leonard Fournette or Chris Carson, right? I've got enough power backs to save my life. So let's go out there.
I'm agreeing with you on that.
And get somebody that's at least got some ability to run. Is an explosive. And Lindsay's got some durability issues because of his size. So you bring him in, you only play him 45% of the snaps, 40%, maybe even less. And he doesn't have to work, doesn't have that workload that Denver was trying to put on him because he had that Pro Bowl season. If they can somehow get Phillip Lindsay for a decent contract, nothing overpaying, fine. Then at least I can be excited about that move.
So you're out on like Duke Johnson.
I think so because I think they can replicate any of these guys in the draft if they actually played them as rookies.
But they're not going to play them. They need a veteran at that spot. They do. Let's work under that assumption.
I guess maybe if they had, I think the same conversation for all of these running backs to me is that first of all, I would prioritize a guy that can win in the passing game. So I don't want anything to do with Leonard Fournette and Chris Carson. I really don't. Agree. The second thing is I got $3 million to give to a running back. Whoever wants it, whoever can play that role, fine, right? Just fine. But I'm not paying anything more than that to that position, especially when you have Damian Harris and Sony Michel rostered, and you know that those are going to be the guys that are going to spearhead your actual ground game. So it's still, to me, Duke Johnson is basically like a wide receiver playing running back. So I guess maybe if you want to go that direction, I'm okay with that too. I'd still prefer Lindsay, but maybe Lindsay ends up being more expensive than a guy like Duke Johnson.
I think those two, I think Kenyon Drake would be a good option, but he's probably outside of the price range that you're talking about. And he might end up being too expensive. He could end up in the $5-6 million range. So we'll see. But I still think that's, now that David Andrews, we know he's gone. We don't know where he's going, but we know he's gone. The number one thing I'm watching right now is what they do at the running back position.
Yeah, me too.
The pass catching running back position. Since I have to specify for
guy too, and I'm actually really surprised that he re-signed with Indianapolis was Marlon Mack. I thought that if they could have gotten Marlon Mack, that would have been nice. I don't know why he's going back to Indy. He's just going to back up Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines and not play. So I'm not really sure what the decision was. But
does that make Nyheim Hines available? Maybe the Patriots call on Nyheim Hines. They got to get rid of some of these draft picks.
Now you're talking because Nyheim Hines is the player
that's the guy, right?
I wanted Nyheim Hines to be the next James White here in New England, 100%. I thought that he could had that ability. We're not sleeping on J.J. Taylor. We've talked a lot about J.J. Taylor on this show. We are concerned about his size, though, right? I would say on top of that,
they've always had two guys. Even when there's been James White, there's been a second guy, whether it was DJ Foster or for the last few years, Rex Burkhead. They've always had two power backs, two pass catching backs, and Brandon Bolden. Both James White and Rex Burkhead are free agents. Rex Burkhead's also coming off a torn ACL. So even if you bring him back, you don't know what his condition is. So even if they draft somebody, and I see it in the chat, you're talking about like guys like Demetric Felt and CJ Verdell, who would be good additions. I think that's actually the way you do it. You draft a pass catching back long-term to be the next James White, but you got to sign a veteran too, because they don't play rookie running backs. And they've always had, right? At the end of Kevin Falk's era, they had Danny Woodhead. When Danny Woodhead was ready to go, they already had Shane Vereen on the roster. When they knew he was about to be up on his contract, they had James White, and they also had TJ Foster. They had two options. Maybe JJ Taylor is that next guy, but even if he is, and I'm not saying he can or can't be, but even if he is, they always have two of those guys. So where are you getting the other guy from? If you go with the draft, you essentially have two rookies because JJ barely played last year. I think getting a veteran in there, whether it's to play alongside JJ Taylor, ahead of him, or behind him, you got to get a veteran in there some way, some form.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. To me, if you're just going to do this, though, then just give Rex Burkhead like $2 million and sign him back, right? You know,
but I don't, with the knee, I would be very careful with that. I
guess maybe that's their hesitation, but if they think that they have anything in JJ Taylor, right, then they don't necessarily need Rex Burkhead to play a whole lot. I don't know. The JJ Taylor thing, we broke this down yesterday too. It's all about, is he going to have the size to hold up in blitz protection, right? When guys blitz up the middle, is he going to be able to hold up there? I don't know. I don't know if he's going to be able to take on a Mike linebacker in the A gap. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that at 5'7", 160 pounds or whatever he is.
So somebody mentioned two things somebody mentioned in the chat. The first one was, can't Harris be a receiver? That is actually something I think worth talking about because he was a good receiver at Alabama. The question is, running backs wear down easy. And if he's going to be a 20 to 25 carry a game guy, you don't want to also throw him the ball 10 times because he's not going to make it through the season, especially now if they're adding that 17th game. So, it's where is he more valuable? As a pass catcher, as a runner? Probably as a runner. The other one, and this is for you, I'm mentioning this specifically for you that I saw in the chat. Williams? No, somebody mentioned, Damian Williams would be a good one too. I wouldn't hate Damian Williams, but somebody mentioned, did Amari Rodgers work out as a running back? Okay. And I know that's your guy.
Don't do that to me. All right. They've done enough great things already that if they add Amari Rodgers in the draft on top of signing Johnny and Hunter Henry, then I will be totally satisfied with anything else they do moving forward. I'll even be satisfied if they play Cam Newton at quarterback, if they have those types of receivers.
I think the compliment Amari Rodgers lining up at running back, but yeah.
Amari Rodgers definitely lining up.
I think us know Patrick Peterson to Minnesota, 1 year, $10 million.
That's actually more money than I expected him to get, even just on a average per year annual basis type of thing. But yeah, if they can get Amari Rodgers with the weapons that they've already added, he's Curtis Samuel, right? Like he's that guy. But in the draft, you're not paying $10 million a year.
Maybe it's Jalen Darden. Then maybe it's. I meant to say that when we were talking about Samuel. They can still go get that guy. Maybe it's Jalen Darden. Maybe they go out and they get Kadarius Toney, whoever. So.
That would be ridiculous. Now, I still think they should trade up for a quarterback. I still think that should be a priority in the draft. But if they can somehow trade up for the quarterback and add Amari Rodgers or add Jalen Darden on day 2 with one of their other picks, then that is a gold offseason right there.
Well, if you can move Gilmore for a pick, let's say you move Gilmore for a second, maybe you give up the 2 firsts, right? First this year, first next year, and one of your seconds this year, right? You turn Gilmore into that second round pick. That gets you the quarterback, and you keep that other second, and then you still have that second round pick, and maybe that turns into a guy like Amari Rodgers, or defensively, we were talking about replacing Adam Butler, maybe a guy like Marvin Wilson, or is it Tyler Shelvin from LSU, the guy you like?
Yeah.
Tyler Shelvin. I forgot if it was Tyler Taylor. So I think there is a way for them to move up for the quarterback and keep a second round pick if they're willing to move on from Stephon Gilmore.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's in play. Everything's in play, but I think what we have seen so far in free agency, and Drew Rosenhaus, who the Patriots signed 4 Rosenhaus clients, actually was on, I think it was NFL Network or ESPN, one of those two, and he said that when he was talking to Bill Belichick during negotiations, he felt a different vibe from Bill than he's ever really felt. Way more aggressive Bill Belichick, right? A guy that's trying to go out there and make these big moves and make these splash signings and all that type of things. And I feel like if you're going to do all of this, and then you're going to come back and Cam Newton on a $5 million contract is the quarterback of this entire thing that you just spend over $300 million on in free agency.
Right.
It just doesn't add up to me that they're going to think big at all the other spots and they're going to pay all of this money everywhere else. And then they're going to pay the quarterback $5 million. And it's not a rookie, right? This is a guy a former MVP, not a rookie. I don't know. It's just a tough sell for me that they're not moving up in the draft. We talked about Deshaun Watson yesterday. I still think that there's some logistical stuff that makes that really difficult. Are the McNairs going to let Nick Caserio him to his old?
Look, I don't want to get into the other stuff that's going on with Deshaun Watson, but at this point, I think the McNairs are capable of literally anything and everything. Again, I said this last night on the show. I'll say it again. Albert Breer kind of put out there that the backlash from the fans would probably prevent Houston from trading Deshaun Watson to the Patriots.
You just can't do that. It's just
if they cared about the backlash, but if they cared about the backlash of the fans, that ship sailed 2 years ago. If they cared about the backlash of the fans, Nick Caserio wouldn't be there. Hell, Jack Easterby wouldn't be there.
I don't think it's necessarily the backlash of the fans. I think if you're Nick Caserio and you trade Deshaun Watson, one of the best, if not the best young quarterback in the NFL, to your former boss for not the best package that you could get for that player, right? I think that's very clear because the Patriots could trade 2 firsts, 2 seconds, Stephon Gilmore and Isaiah Wynn, and that is not a good enough trade compared to the Jets or the Dolphins on paper, right? The Dolphins can give 3 and 18 and Tua and more, right? That's a much better deal for Houston. And Jets can put number 2 on the table and Sam Darnold. That's a much better trade for Houston. So if you do that and you do basically what you are doing, if you're Nick Caserio, is doing a solid by Bill Belichick because he got you this job, right? He got you where you are in your NFL career. So you're sort of paying it forward to Bill. That's career suicide for Nick Caserio.
You're in that, they're in that nut house that everybody has to kiss Jack Easterby's ring. And if Jack Easterby wants Deshaun Watson, I don't think Nick Caserio's as much as I like Nick Caserio, I respect Nick Caserio. I don't, what's that movie again? I can't think of the movie. It's not up to him. He's a puppet now. He is being controlled by Jack Easterby. If Jack Easterby wants Deshaun Watson to go to New England, I think Deshaun Watson's going to go to New England. I think that, and somebody said this today, I don't remember who, it might've been Dan Lifshatz from 98.5 The Sports Hub, that more likely than Houston, like the owner saying we can't do this because it looks bad trading Watson to New England, would be a David Stern, Chris Paul type scenario where Roger Goodell steps in and says we're not going to allow this trade. I think the league would stop it before Cal McNair would stop it. That's how much of a mess the Houston Texans are. Let me remind you, Evan, they're a franchise player. And again, this is a franchise that's only been around 20 years. The most legendary player in the history of their franchise demanded a release. Didn't say trade me, just wanted out. He didn't even want the team to get anything back for him in return. That's how bad it is there. That's how bad it is. I do not think that there's any chance that the Texans, grow some sort of conscience or any sort of cojones and understand what it looks like trading Deshaun Watson to the Patriots. I think they've all completely lost their minds.
Yeah,
sorry, that's been brewing.
No, so we got this Deshaun Watson stuff out. I think we've sat on these opinions a little bit longer than we did yesterday, so we're a little bit more formulated on that. The last thing I want to say about the quarterbacks, though, and I think you're going to.
Is it about Tim Boyle?
No, definitely not.
I love that this is a Tim Boyle podcast. I'm going to steer into that.
I'm going into the draft, right?
Yeah.
This offense with 2 tight ends, a strong running game. It's Trey Lance. This offense is built for Trey Lance to be here, right? And learn from Cam Newton. And he is the type of quarterback that might benefit from a Patrick Mahomes year, right? He might benefit from sitting behind Cam for a year, or at least for half the season or something like that. And the way they're building this scheme, the way that they're going to want to run the football and operate off of play action off of that, attack the middle of the field, all of this just screams Trey Lance to me. And I just feel like it screams Trey Lance. You know, we've talked about Mac Jones and how well he fits into the old traditional boxes for the Patriots. I think now when you look at the type of scheme and the type of offense that they're building, the playmakers that they've accumulated, this is Trey Lance. This has him written all over it to me. If you just want to read the tea leaves of the moves that they have made and who they might be thinking about actually drafting, going up and drafting, Trey Lance is definitely the skill set that totally fits what they're doing. He's definitely the type of guy that is going to want to throw the seam, that's going to want to throw the ball up the field. And now you have these tight ends that can run the seam. You have Nelson Aguilar, who's an explosive wide receiver. It's just all over it. And they have the guy in Cam that can ease him in, that can teach him, that can show him how to be a dual threat quarterback in the NFL, that can do all of those types of mentor things. And I think that that's actually going to be something that Cam would embrace, knowing that Trey Lance might be sitting the full season and Cam's probably going to start the entire year anyways. I don't know. I feel like if you're looking for a splash at quarterback and you want to read tea leaves and you want to look into everything a little bit too much, it definitely feels more like Trey Lance in a trade up than Deshaun Watson coming here to New England when it doesn't really make much sense.
I think the most important question pertaining to the New England Patriots after the last, 48, 72 hours, right? And I've said there's a lot of important questions. Running back, pass catching running back, important question. Future at center, important question. How they're going to use Johnny Smith, important question. The most important question, that the question all Patriots fans should be asking themselves and trying to answer, how do you get from 15 to 6 in the draft?
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. I mean, if Trey Lance isn't there at 6, you're going to get a shot, I think, at either Wilson or Fields, who would also be, by the way, decent fits in this offense.
Sure.
You're going to get, we're saying Lance because I think we assume those guys are off. Is Lance a better fit, a better option than those two guys if they have a choice?
I think so. I really do think so because Lance can operate in the quick game that they're going to want to do under Josh McDaniels, and he can do the Cam package, right? I think Zach Wilson's a mobile-ish quarterback, but he's more like mobile like a Baker Mayfield is mobile, right? Where you can roll him out and you can move him outside the pocket, but he's not truly a mobile quarterback. I think Justin Fields can fit it too, to a degree, certainly. But to me, the guy that I think is really checks all the boxes and kind of fits exactly what they want is Lance. And I just feel like the perfect kind of transition for the Patriots is Cam handing off the baton to a guy like Trey Lance and kind of learning from the original Trey Lance in Cam and kind of, mentoring the young kid along. Yeah. And I just feel like that is such a great fit. I think that's such a great way to go about it. And now that they have all of these things covered in free agency, there's absolutely no reason to stockpile these picks. The Patriots do not need to make 9 picks in the draft in April.
No.
They don't.
No.
So,
and by the way, they don't have a ton of pending free agents next year, right? These guys they've signed are on mostly 3 to 4 year deals, and the way they've structured their contracts, they don't have a ton of guys up next year. So consolidating picks goes beyond this year. If you want to give up that first round pick next year, I think that's on the table. When I look at it, Evan, and there was a report today from the guy who runs NFL Network. I'm blanking on his name. The son of the original guy. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Lance Zierlein?
No. The NFL film. Sorry, NFL Films.
Oh, Greg Cosell.
Greg Cosell, yeah. So Greg Cosell was on Outkick Radio today, and he said that what he is hearing is the Jets they want to move forward with Sam Darnold, apparently.
Yeah.
Just one report, but they might want to move forward with Sam Darnold. That's huge for the Patriots because if they do that, it takes one team out of the running to trade up to 6 because you figure the Jets, if they're keeping Darnold, they're going to trade out of 2. They're not going to keep that pick. So all of a sudden now you have a little less competition. You're probably going to have 3 quarterbacks in the top 4. It's good. Lance should be there at 6. I think at 5, you're pinning in Cincinnati. They're taking Penny Sewell. That's is what it is. That's there. You got to get to 6. You got to figure out what's the math to get to 6. Is it 15, a second, and a future first? Does it involve Stephon Gilmore? Does it involve another player? Like, how much do you have to give up to get to that point? That's the mental, that's the mental exercise we all need to be doing because I think that's what it's going to come down to on draft night. And as I've said many times, if they truly believe, if they're as sold on Lance as you are, and as some people are, and if they believe he's the guy that's going to come here and start for 10 to 15 years and win playoff games and potentially win a Super Bowl or 2, no price is too high to move up and get it.
So Tim Boyle's
that is unless Tim Boyle's available.
Shout out to Tim Boyle. He's here.
I love this.
I think somebody was listening to us and actually created a Tim Boyle account.
I think that's what happened.
So I that's exactly what happened. So I'm gonna say this: Tim Boyle, he wants to be here. Let's get Tim. No, I've patted the table for Trey Lance for a while now.
Why not? Why can't we have both? Why can't we have both Trey Lance and Tim Boyle and Cam Newton, and that's your quarterback room, and you have 3 potential MVPs in that room?
I think
well, 2 potential MVPs and a former MVP.
Trey Lance, get him here. All right, Alex and I will be back tomorrow night.
Plenty of more Tim Boyle talk.
We're going to talk a lot more about Tim Boyle. I'm going to continue to talk a lot about Trey Lance, and all you guys are probably going to get annoyed by it at the end of the
get used to it. That's what I'd say. Don't get annoyed by it. Get used to it. I was not, Evan, you can remind the people. I was not sold on Trey. I wasn't anti-Trey Lance, but I wasn't sold on Trey Lance. I was just kind of, North Dakota State hasn't played in a year. You and watching him a little bit more, the pro day did a ton to sell me on him. It's easy to sell yourself on this kid. There's a lot to like. He's not a sure thing, but there's a ton to like compared to the other guys in the draft. Instead of getting annoyed with us talking about him, get on board. Evan will help you out. Go to his Twitter. Tweet at Evan at Easy Lazar. I want you to sell me on Trey Lance, and he'll do it.
So my 10-second spiel here about why I like Trey Lance so much is that this is not a guy that's broken mechanically. This is a very mechanically sound quarterback that
quick release.
That just needs to be more consistent, right? That just needs to be more consistent every single time he throws the football. And in that way, he reminds everybody that watches him of Josh Allen, right? Of just a guy that has all the natural throwing ability, has a smooth release, gets the ball out quickly, has good feet, good footwork, good base. All the mechanical stuff is figured out. He just needs to do it repetitiously every single time, right? The same way. That's the difference. We're not talking about a Lamar Jackson. We're not talking about Cam Newton who have broken mechanics. This is a player that has smooth throwing mechanics and a smooth release. And that's why with more consistency, with more playing time, with more repetitions, it's just going to get better. And lastly, let's remember that season he put together in 2019 at North Dakota, 2019 at North Dakota State. He was 19 years old. He was 19 and he was lighting the FCS on fire. Right? If he's doing that at 19 and showing the mental capacity that he was for the position at 19, imagine how good he's going to be at 24, 25. Right? You know, that's the sell on Trey Lance right there. And I really could not be more keen on a player than I am on him. He's definitely my number one target for the Patriots in the draft. Again, Alex and I back tomorrow. We went long on this one. I'm sure we'll rant about something like Trey Lance again tomorrow night. So come back 7:30, same time, same place. Thank you all for listening so much and listening all week long. We've had a great amount of interaction with you guys. Great numbers so far on all these shows. And we definitely really appreciate it. And we will be back tomorrow night for you guys to talk about whatever the Patriots have next up their sleeves, because I don't think they're done just yet. Thanks, guys, for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow night.